Hello, COP 1000 students. This is Dennis. Looking at the payroll in function program, redoing the payroll or calculating payroll, however you want to look at it, first, second time, using functions. So this flow chart that I created would be for a single run of a payroll. So the program would start, it would ask the user for their name, their hourly rate, and their hours worked. Then it would have a decision statement. Was the hours worked over 40? If it was, I would head this way. If it wasn't, I'm going this way. So if I head this way, that means they worked overtime. So this is the calculation for their regular pay. This is the calculation for their overtime. And if this number was not greater than 40, that means they didn't work overtime. Here's the calculation for regular pay, and overtime pay is nothing. Gross pay is reg pay plus overtime pay. Coming on down this line, federal tax is my gross pay times some federal tax rate, and the Social Security tax is the gross pay times some Social Security tax rate, and the net pay is the gross pay minus these two taxes, and this would be the output of the program. The program would stop, or if you had this in some type of loop where you wanted to do it again, you would loop cut. So now I'm going to go into, I'm using Dev-C, it doesn't matter which IDE you use, but here's my payroll program, my comment header. My library links are my includes. I define a pause constant and a CLS constant. I'm assuming Fed tax rate is at 28% and Social Security tax rate is 7.5%. That can vary. And here's this little built-in function that I'm going to have called myFlush, which clears out the keyboard buffer. And I'm going to use an alias flush, so every time I scan, I clear out the keyboard buffer. So now that you're beginning to use functions, before main is where you're going to do what's called prototype your functions. So this little section would list all the functions in my program, hopefully in alphabetical order. And each function, this is just the function header. For example, float. This is a value returning function, returning a float. This is the name of the function. I'm passing it one thing, gross pay. Here's a value returning function, passing it two things. Notice these two things are blank. This could just say reg pay and overtime pay, or it could just say I'm passing a float and a float. I'm not going to go through this, but all of this, my function prototypes, are done before I encounter main. Before I encounter main. Main's typically going to be very short now that we have functions, and in this particular case, I created a little menu-driven program, has three choices, and, oops, let me get rid of this. This is not even on my menu. Has basically two choices, do a new payroll or quit. If they press Q, I leave the program. If they don't press an N or a Q, I tell them invalid. So I'm going to continue the loop until they press Q. So this is the main thing, this new payroll. So after main is where I will be writing all my functions. After main. So the main function here is new payroll, and in alphabetical order, I think that would be right here. So in new payroll, the scope of new payroll, beginning here and ending here, these are the variables that new payroll needs. These variables are local to new payroll. First thing I'm going to do is start to populate these. So here's my get the name. Here's calculate hourly rate. Here is calculate hours worked. Here's calculate the regular pay, the overtime pay, the gross pay, the federal tax, Social Security tax, and net pay. And then finally, after I do all these calculations, this displays the paycheck stub. Go from the top down, To calculate federal tax, I basically need one thing called gross pay. The reason I do not need federal tax or Fed tax passed down is because it's a global constant. It's the only thing allowed to be global would be a global constant. So I take the gross pay, bring it into the scope of calc Fed tax, multiply it by that, and return the result. Return the result. Calculating net pay is going to need gross pay, federal tax, Social Security tax, and it actually doesn't need this net pay. So I could delete that, but then I'm going to have to change it in my program multiple places. But this really is not necessary. You know what? Let's go and fix it. Just to show you, so calculate net pay does not need net pay. So there's basically three places I'm going to take it out. Take it out of the function prototype, the function call, and the function header. So here's the function itself. and this is the header in the function. We took it out of the prototype. So in new payroll, when I calculate net pay, I do not need to pass it net pay. This should still run. We'll find out in a minute. So I think the last thing I did was net pay. Here's federal, here's calculating overtime pay. Overtime pay brings in hours worked and hourly rate. It says if the hours worked is less than 40, then the overtime pay is nothing. Otherwise, the overtime pay is the hours worked over 40 times the hourly rate times 1.5 or time and a half. These parentheses are not optional because of order of operations. Calculating the regular pay, basically the same thing. I bring in the hourly rate, the hours worked. I say if hours worked less than or equal to 40, then my regular pay is the number of hours they worked times their hourly rate. Otherwise, if they worked overtime in a regular 40-hour work week, their pay would stop at 40. I already did federal tax, so Social Security tax is basically the same thing. Gross pay takes my reg pay and my overtime pay and adds them together, returns that result. Here's my menu for the program. So this is the menu of the program. Notice any menu should start with clearing the screen. Here's my final function, which is, or the main function besides calculate payroll, and this is display the payroll result. So display the payroll, I don't want to do any calculations here, so I pass all these things in. And just to let you know, there is much better ways that would be taught in COP 2220 or C programming than to pass all these parameters. But we're not in that class, so this is the only way we know to do it. Bunch of print statements. Notice I use get float when I calculate the hourly rate and the hours worked. I'll just say look at that. And I want you to look at this function. This is a little more advanced too, because in C, strings are actually called arrays. So this is passing an array. This is putting information in the array. And notice there's no return, but this name goes back. And that's just because of the way arrays work. And I don't want to explain more than that. Here's my get user choice. Here's that flush I talked about. And let's see this run. So it looks like I didn't destroy it. So new payroll, enter the employee's name. And notice it says first name. In real life, you would say first and last, but that's a more advanced topic too. So I'll just go first name. How many hours do they work? 10. I'm sorry, how much do they make per hour? $10. And let's just say they worked 50 hours. So we know their regular pay should be 400, their overtime pay should be 150, or their gross pay should be 550. So there is the first 40 hours times 10. There's the next 10 hours times 1.5, or 15. There's my gross. There's my federal, my Social Security, my net pay. And that's basically that. Right back to the menu. Notice if I type anything but N or Q, it'll yell at me and come right back. I can enter new payroll as many times as I want. And it should be calculating right each and every time. Anytime I want to quit, I just type Q and the program ends. One more time, real quick summary. Let's go back up to main. So here's my main, real short and sweet, just a couple calls to functions. Here's my function prototypes, must be done before main. This is done before main so that main is the very first function you see in the program. Main is the very first function one sees, which means we write all of our functions not above main but below main. So notice in here I even put a comment after main that says write your functions here. All my functions go here separated with a at the end of the what we're calling in my online class the mustache. I repeat the name of the function and put the word end, separating them by a space, keeping them in alphabetical order. And that's that. Okay, it's 10 minutes almost, so I'm going to stop it now. Thanks.